A typical workday at a marketing agency office always seemed routine and predictable to me. I, Emily Wilson, sat at my desk, surrounded by piles of documents and the flickering glow of my computer screen. My chestnut hair was neatly gathered into a bun, and I tried to maintain order not only at work, but also in my life. Everything was going as usual until the phone rang. The screen displayed a number that immediately caught my attention. It was Jake, my old classmate, with whom I hadn't spoken in a long time. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity stir within me. Why had he decided to call now? Thinking back on the years spent in different cities and following different paths, I couldn't understand what might have prompted him to take such an unexpected step. Gathering my thoughts, I pressed the answer button. His voice, calm and confident, immediately stirred mixed emotions in me. "Hey, Emily," he said. "Long time no see. How are you?" We exchanged polite phrases about how we were doing, but inside my mind was racing. Jake had always been someone who knew how to engage people. His confidence was magnetic, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Then he suggested we meet up over the weekend to catch up and share news. For a moment, I hesitated. Going back to the past, which seemed to have been left far behind, felt risky, but curiosity got the better of me, and despite my inner doubts, I agreed. "Okay, Jake, let's meet up this weekend." After the call, the whole evening felt unsettled. The faint noise of the city outside my window didn't help calm my thoughts. I lay in bed trying to figure out what had led Jake to make this call. Perhaps he needed help, or maybe he just wanted to rekindle an old friendship. Whatever the reason, I knew this unexpected visit could change a lot in my life. With each passing hour, the anticipation of the approaching day only heightened my anxiety. I tried to distract myself, reading, watching TV shows, but thoughts of Jake kept returning. What if our paths had diverged so much that our communication would become awkward? Or perhaps there were unresolved feelings between us that we hadn't even realized. Finally, the evening before the meeting arrived. I sat on the couch, contemplating everything, trying to prepare myself for whatever might happen. Taking a deep breath, I realized that no matter the outcome, this visit would mark the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Saturday morning started off calmly. The sun's rays lazily filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in soft light. I sat in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and thinking about the upcoming weekend. Thoughts of Jake's call were still spinning in my head. Why did he choose now to reach out? There were no answers, and this only heightened my anxiety. At noon, I heard the sound of an approaching car. I walked to the window and saw a white car slowly driving up to our house. My heart skipped a beat. Jake had always been someone who could attract attention, and I couldn't help but notice how he looked now. Fit, stylish, and confident. His neatly styled hair and well-groomed beard gave him a mature, grown-up appearance, which was quite different from the person I knew back in school. As he got out of the car, I felt a mix of joy and anxiety. He smiled, and in his eyes I could see genuine warmth. "Emily, it's been so long," he said, extending his hand. I responded with a smile and hugged him, sensing a familiar yet, at the same time, new dynamic between us. "Hey, Jake!" "It's so good to see you," I said, shaking his hand. The three of us exchanged greetings and sat down in the living room to discuss the plans for the weekend. At first, everything was calm. Jake talked about his life. He had moved to another city, built a successful career, and started a family. His stories were lively and inspiring, and I couldn't help but admire his achievements. Memories of our school days began resurfacing more frequently, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unresolved. Michael, noticing my distraction, suggested a walk in the garden, leaving us alone. I was left alone with Jake, and we gradually deepened our conversation. His presence stirred strange emotions in me, both pleasant and unsettling. We reminisced about old times, laughed at old jokes, but somewhere beneath the surface, there was a sense of nostalgia and an undefined sadness. As evening fell and the sun began to set, I felt the past mixing with the current emotions. Jake wasn't quite the person I remembered, but his inner world remained as deep and mysterious as ever. We sat together on the terrace, enjoying the fresh air and watching the sunset, and I realized that this visit had opened a door to the past that seemed long closed. When night descended on our house, I returned to the bedroom with Michael. His caring gaze and quiet words comforted me, but inside, thoughts of Jake and what might come next still swirled. This unexpected visit marked the beginning of a journey that would lead me to new discoveries about myself and my feelings. The days following Jake's arrival felt like I was balancing on a thin line between the past and the present. His presence in my home, his voice, his questions, all of it became a sharp hook, catching my memories. I noticed how my thoughts increasingly wandered to the school hallways, to the breaks when we used to sneak away from the noisy cafeteria to the empty sports field, or to those evenings when we sat in the library dreaming about the future. At night, I had restless dreams. I would find myself again in our old classroom, where the sun barely filtered through the dull blinds. Jake was there, always the center of attention. He smiled, joked, and I stood on the side, unable to say a word. Sometimes it seemed like he was trying to tell me something, to convey something, but I couldn't hear a sound. Waking up, I could feel my heart pounding and my throat dry. These dreams brought back doubts I had long tried to forget. At dinner, when the three of us, Michael, Jake, and I, gathered together, any phrase could turn into a hint of the past. I noticed how Jake would tell stories from those years, trying to smile, but every now and then, something flickered in his eyes that made me uneasy. I tried to appear confident, to maintain a friendly tone, but deep inside, a real storm was raging. Michael, attentive and caring, of course, began to notice the changes. One evening, when I came home from the office, he asked, "Emily, you've been a bit distant. Maybe you want to talk about what's going on?" I smiled and joked it off, citing fatigue and stress at work. But we both knew it wasn't about that. What frightened me the most was the realization that I couldn't clearly articulate my feelings, even to myself. Everything had become a mix: nostalgia, suspicion, curiosity, fear. And somewhere amid all that chaos, there was a lingering uncertainty about whether my present was strong enough not to be shaken by the touch of old memories. I tried to find an outlet. I took out an old album with photos from my school years and spent a long time staring at the faded pictures. Here we are, Jake and I, at the school honor board, where our certificates for debate victories hang. Here we are, all together after graduation, laughing as though a cloudless life awaited us. Looking at these photos, I tried to understand what of the past still lived within me and what had long faded with those days. At times, it seemed as though I was having an invisible dialogue with myself, trying to find answers, but only stumbling upon new questions. Why did Jake's presence trouble me so much? Did we truly have unresolved feelings? Or were these just ghosts of the past tugging at my conscience? The answers didn't come right away. I understood that I would have to deal with this step by step, unlocking the locks in my soul and sorting through all these mixed emotions. But for now, I only felt an unexplained heaviness growing inside me. Every action I took, every word spoken in Jake's presence, felt like a step on a knife's edge. And I didn't know whether I would stay balanced on that line, without hurting myself or those I cared about. The inner battles were in full swing. I hoped that time and willpower would help me figure out what exactly was causing this quiet storm in my soul, and most importantly, would teach me how not to lose myself, no matter how far I had to go into the past. The emotions I had been trying to hide gradually started to break free, like water seeping through the cracks of a dam. Jake's presence in my home became not just a reminder of the past. It turned into a catalyst, tearing my stability apart. Every conversation, every glance, every casually thrown comment ignited a fire within me that I could no longer control. One evening, when Michael went to the store, Jake and I were left alone. This was the first opportunity to talk without witnesses. "Emily," he began somewhat hesitantly, "I have to ask. Why did you disappear? Why did you stop writing to me?" His question caught me off guard. I froze, unsure of what to say. Of course, I remembered the moment when our paths diverged. At that time, I thought it was a natural course of things. We grew, chose different paths, and life pulled us apart. But hearing this question now felt like a blow to the heart. I realized that for him, it mattered more than I had thought. "Jake," I said, trying to stay calm. "I thought we were both just moving on. It wasn't personal. We grew up, that's all." He frowned, his gaze becoming sharper. "I don't know. It felt like you just erased me from your life. You knew that you were more important to me than just a friend." Those words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. My heart raced, but I didn't know how to respond. This conversation had opened a door that I wasn't ready to open. Instead of addressing it, I tried to change the subject, but I knew this was just a temporary delay. After that conversation, I realized I needed to set clear boundaries. I couldn't let the past overshadow my present life. The next day, I suggested to Jake that we spend more time outside the house, visit old friends, or walk around the city. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" he asked with a slight smile, but there was pain in his voice. "No, of course not," I nervously laughed. "I just thought you might enjoy spending time differently, not just here." But my words didn't reach their goal. Jake seemed to have no intention of leaving. On the contrary, he tried to spend more time with me, even when Michael was home. His presence became too obvious, too overwhelming. Amid all this, my best friend Lisa began to notice something. One day, when she stopped by for a coffee, her gaze became sharp. "Emily, you're acting strange," she said, setting her cup down. "Something's going on?" I tried to brush it off, explaining that it was all work-related, but Lisa, knowing me too well, didn't buy it. "It's because of Jake, isn't it? You liked him back in school. You never told me, but I remember how you looked at him," she said with a smile, but there was a hidden question in her eyes. I felt a chill run through me. "Lisa, that was ages ago. I have a family, and I'm happy." She nodded, but her smile became tight. "Then why do you look like you're carrying around a volcano ready to explode?" That conversation shook me. She was right. I was indeed carrying feelings inside me that I couldn't express, and it was becoming dangerous. If even Lisa noticed the changes, how long could I hide them from Michael? Each day became harder. Jake kept finding moments to talk, trying to understand what was going on between us. Michael seemed to be sensing the shift in the atmosphere at home, even though he didn't directly speak about it. And me? I felt stretched between two realities. The one where I was loyal to my husband and my present, and the one where the past kept knocking at the door, demanding attention. Everything I had tried to hide could no longer stay in the shadows. Jake kept finding ways to be near, even though I tried to distance myself. He was persistent, and at some point, I felt that his presence no longer simply reminded me of the past, but began filling the voids I hadn't been able to fill in a long time. But there was nothing easier than hiding this from Michael, who believed that everything was under control. I tried to be attentive to his feelings, but inside, everything tightened with unsaid words. That evening, everything finally came to the surface. Michael and I were sitting at dinner, as usual. Eventually, he put down his utensils and said, "Emily, you know something's wrong. You're not the same anymore. This is all because of Jake, isn't it?" The words hung in the air, and I felt everything inside me tighten. Michael's gaze was direct, and there was something more than just concern in it. There was suspicion that I could not ignore. I tried to respond, but the words didn't come. My lips barely moved, and I felt a coldness crawl up my spine. I could have told him the truth, but every time I tried to speak, barriers in my mind appeared that I couldn't cross. Michael waited for a moment and asked again, his voice now tinged with disappointment. "Do you really think I don't notice how you're changing? With him? With Jake? What's going on between you two? You're not telling me, but I know something's not right." At that moment, I realized that everything Michael and I had built was on the verge of falling apart. This question was not just about Jake. It was a question about us, about what had happened to our love and trust. I closed my eyes, and at that moment when I opened them again, the decision had already been made. I couldn't hide from myself or from him anymore. "Yes, Michael, something is wrong," I said, and every sound of those words felt like a punch to my own stomach. I feel lost. Jake has come back into my life, and I don't know how to deal with it. Everything has become too complicated." His face changed instantly. First, a shadow of pain appeared, then it was replaced by anger mixed with disappointment. "Are you serious?" His voice became hoarse but calm. "You let him back into your life, and now I'm in a position where I can't even trust my own wife?" I felt an emptiness growing inside me, and my heart tightened into a hard lump. We both fell silent, consumed by this catastrophic realization. I tried to take his hand, but he pulled away. He stood up, rising sharply from his chair. "I can't take this anymore, Emily. You've betrayed me. I thought we were stronger than this." I couldn't answer because all I could do was stand and watch his figure walk away down the hall, and then hear the door slam shut behind him. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a feeling of betrayal that was irreversible. We both knew nothing would ever be the same. That night, Michael left. He didn't say when he would return, and I knew that perhaps he would never come back. Jake, realizing we had reached this point, stayed silent. He left with the same calmness with which he had entered, not trying to interfere with what had already been destroyed. I sat in the empty room, where now only the echo of my thoughts remained, and the feeling that I had lost everything. Lonely nights became my constant companions, and the cold in the house, after Michael left, felt much stronger than I had imagined. Each day I became more aware that I had not only destroyed my marriage but also a part of myself. I sat in our home, which once was full of life and warmth, and felt like I was in an empty cage with no way out. Time passed, and I tried to drown myself in work. Work became my salvation, my only way of not thinking about what had happened. I worked on projects, met with clients, and all my thoughts went into tasks that required no emotions from me. It was easier. Remembering what I had lost was too painful. Sometimes I spent evenings alone, not knowing what to do, and the only comfort I found was in books or movies, which I watched to distract myself. I tried to find meaning in this chaos, in these endless questions about how everything could have turned out like this. Why had I allowed Jake back into my life, knowing what consequences it might have? Why hadn't I walked away when I felt I was losing control? Michael hadn't called. I didn't try to call him, fearing it would only make the situation worse. We were both experiencing this crisis in our own way. He was stunned, disappointed, and probably still angry. I couldn't imagine how he now saw me or what he felt looking at our broken family, but I knew I couldn't go back. The emotional wounds were too deep for us to simply forget what had happened. One day, I found a letter from Jake that he had left in one of the desk drawers. He hadn't mentioned it to me, but I felt his presence in every line. The letter was long and honest. Jake explained his actions and apologized for everything that had happened. He said that, in reality, he had only wanted for us to be close friends again, and that returning to my life had been a mistake, which he now understood. He apologized for interfering in my life, for indirectly destroying my marriage, for all the moments that were now ruined. He regretted how everything had turned out and now asked for forgiveness for all of it. Reading his letter, I felt relief and bitterness at the same time. On one hand, it was hard to believe that he sincerely regretted bringing me to this point. On the other hand, I felt that he was right. There was no going back. There was no way to turn back, and all that remained was to move forward. I left the letter on the desk and sat for a while, not knowing what to do. I wasn't going to call him or seek explanations. This chapter in my life was over. It was part of my past, and although I was still struggling with it, I knew I had to learn to let go. A few days later, Michael called me. His voice was cold and a little distant, but I could feel that he couldn't just leave everything in the past. "Emily," he said, "I don't know what will happen with us. I don't know if I can forgive you. But I can't live like this." His words made me shudder. It wasn't just a statement. It was a confession we had both been waiting for, to understand what lay ahead. We had both lost something important, but now we had to figure out whether we should try to reclaim what we had destroyed or move on with our separate paths. I was silent for a few seconds before answering. I know, Michael. I know. But I can't say I'm ready to go back to what we had. We've both changed. The silence on the other end of the line was long, almost tangible. I understand, he said, and I felt his voice soften. I don't know what comes next, but let's try to figure it out. Maybe we need time. I don't know what will happen, but I think we need to talk. Then he hung up. After everything that had happened, I had to face myself. I was going through a crisis that not only affected my relationships, but also the very foundation of who I was. I realized that everything I had thought about myself was, in some way, an illusion. I didn't know what to do next. How could I rebuild my life after everything I had built had fallen apart? I couldn't answer that question right away, and it was frightening.